Hello and welcome to the War Report. Now, we have a very special episode, not only because it is episode 20, but because of recent events. Recent, very good events, and, the Trump Putin summit in particular. I'll just wait for a few people to get here before I get entirely into our stories for today, which, even the ones about, Syria and Israel still, in a roundabout way, do relate. So, yeah, we'll start that as soon as the audience gets
Okay.
in here, and we have arrived. So let's get right into it. So starting out with Syria news, because that's become a bit of a tradition on the show. Several members of the White Helmets, of course, as all of you probably know, an Al Qaeda front and quote unquote humanitarian workers during all these chemical attacks, have been resettled into Canada. Now, of course, I think this is both good and bad. Good because they're out of Syria; they're not going to be able to, drum up any, support for a war there. But bad because the West is importing literal terrorists. So I think I'll hand it over to the Canadians for his thoughts on this particular story.
Yeah, this is regrettable news, but in a way, it's to be expected. I think by now we all understand where the alliance lies, and it's going to lie on one side, Sunni Islam, uh, South Saudi Arabian oil, Israel, the West, NATO, America, EU, so on and so forth, and that's one of the prices that the West has to take, and it's been the case at least since the war in Afghanistan in 1979, and it will continue to be so. Uh, so this is, I made a joke tweet last year about like, finally, Western mercenaries are getting the respect they deserve. Uh, Sweden did a similar thing last year as well. So that's just part of the deal. We are under the umbrella of the West in the U.S. And I think this is sort of one of the deals that we make. We might have a small military expenditure, so we'll have to take in a few white helmet humanitarians, and that's the price we pay.
Now, what I can tell you what I think they are going to do. What they're going to do is you've seen this with Europe, Western Europe, and other countries, and Canada in particular, where you'll have a lot of these refugees, quote unquote, come to the country, take the welfare, take the money, use that to fund their travels to Syria or Iraq, one of these other battlefields to go and fight in the war. So they'll probably ditch their white helmets, since seeing as the organization has all but fallen apart at this point, fortunately, and probably just go, resume the role as ISIS Al Qaeda fighters on the front lines. So that's my
Yeah, that's
prediction
true.
for
And
what's going to happen there.
thousands of cases like this.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
notice the rhetoric is also very different now since 2015. Like in 2015, there was still a kind of a semblance in the West of being against, radicalism and extremism, in particular in Islam. But now it's well, that's just part of it. So we've moved a long way from 2013. Sweden is, for instance, has programs to rehabilitate. Former ISIS fighters and former Al Qaeda fighters. That's where we are now.
yeah, I mean, oh hey, I mean, it's basically because the Western countries very clearly had an agenda. It's the reward for fighting Assad. Now that's what it pretty much boils down to, at least in my eyes. But we have a few more developments out of Syria, both good and both you could see some tensions, but I doubt you will. So Syrian forces are now on the border of the Golan Heights, which was annexed by the Israelis in, I believe it was the 1968 war. But basically, the way it was described, they're on a hill overlooking the fence that the Israelis have built on the Golan Heights. So, yeah, it's basically the point where Assad, at least, barring the entire Kurdish situation, which there are negotiations ongoing about that, has, lived up to his claim of every inch will be free. So, I doubt he's going to go after. I doubt he's going to, start, another 1973 war with Israel over something just as small as the Golan Heights. And I doubt he's going to take any risks, especially now he has his very fragile victory with the, West just barely backing off. So I don't see that happening, but I think it's a very good thing.
Yeah,
The fact, go on.
it's a bargaining chip. he's turning it into a bargaining chip. Data is now like under his control, basically. That's inevitable. He can use this as a bargaining chip the way he's using Iran as well. Uh, from what I so far have gathered this week, is that that section northeast of Daraa is an area that America controls. That's where its air power is on the border with Iraq. And Israel has been using that space to attack three or four of the five Iranian bases. And it's doing this kind of, they leave Israel and fly this kind of U shape and fly. Basically, this American airspace is a launch pad for them. And it's also a shelter for Al Qaeda and whatever other, Al Qaeda in Syria and whatever other jihadists that the West has to, periodically support and hide and what have you. Um, so he could use that. He's winning the war.
He's won the war, if you ask me. But
Yeah, essentially.
Definitely good point you make about the Iranian bargaining chips, which will play into my next point here. I think basically what Assad's going to do is he's going to have them help snuff out the last of the groups such as ICE and Al Qaeda and the other quote unquote moderate rebels in the country. And he's probably going to expel most, if not all of them, after the war, with especially considering the fact Russia's position in the Mediterranean with the Tartus port is pretty much solidified. They'll most likely take the role of guarantor. So Assad will basically remove the excuse for these continued Israeli attacks that have been going on for the past 3 months and say, oh, well, in the past 3 months, I mean, they've been scaled up the past 3 months, but more like the past, 7 years. But yeah, he'll have the Russians for a guarantor because Russia and Israel have this, I guess you could say, love-hate relationship where they respect each other, but they're not necessarily allies or friends. And then,
Yeah.
basically he'll still have the Iranian backing, just with less or none of them in the country. So the reason I mentioned the Russians is because the Russians have begun to move more naval arms into Syria, probably for that reason I just stated, and to solidify their victory and control over the Tartus port.
Hmm.
So if you have any
Yeah,
comment on that, yeah.
I don't. Yeah, not particularly. I mean, the only thing that's left in Syria right now. Well, there's two. There's the Idlib area next to Turkey in the northwest section of the country, and then on the north side of the Euphrates, there's the Kurdish question. But primarily, most of the country is under his control now, and I'm presuming a lot of the oil fields as well.
Yeah, but the Afrin area that the Turks controlled that they took from the Kurds, which really taught a lesson to the Eastern Kurds that they probably want to cooperate with Assad. More than anything, I say it benefited them for them taking Afrin. Basically, they're going to use that as a supply line to keep like just a slow burning war of attrition to keep some leverage on Assad. And I don't expect like a Syrian-Turkish conflict or anything. But you know what? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I hope I'm not. But again, that's all aside the point. And the Russians have also pressured the Israelis to basically disband these terrorist groups to either kick them out or stop protecting them, or else they would strike them. Now, I think Russia, of course, they're not going to.
Maybe Israel will accept them. Like I'm sure this.
Yeah.
I'm sure Israel has Netflix. They can use whatever the Swedes are using to reform them.
Yeah, I mean, truth be told, they'll probably find some country that is very accepting of refugees, pawn them off there. It's like, okay, I'd rather not get into a conflict with direct conflict Syria, Iran, and Russia. So you know what, we're just gonna cut our losses here because Netanyahu does seem like that type. I mean, he comes out, he talks about game, and when it comes down to anything that's gonna threaten his position of power, which a major war would, he's gonna say, okay, I give up. And I think it's funny how many in the Western right wing circles like to idolize him and paint him as a strong leader. But again, that's all aside the point. But funny thing is about the Golan Heights, while we're on topic, is you have, I don't think it's going to pass, but you have this small amount of U.S. lawmakers pushing really hard for the United States to recognize the Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights, so it would be part of the reciprocal, defense treaty, because they're afraid that the Syrians are going to attack the groups within the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think that'll pass. I think most people in Congress are. I mean, of course, there's the influence there, but I don't think most of them are influenced enough to do that. And even if they did, I doubt we would, go to war with Iran for Israel based on, I mean, Trump has done some things like the embassy move, the Iran deal, that might signal it. But again, most of it has been symbolic. Most of it has been just in words. And like I said, I doubt the Russians and Iranians and Syrians will actually, stage an offensive in the Golan Heights just to get rid of a few pockets of Al Qaeda. It's more just bluster, if you ask me. But the
Yeah,
other
you took
interesting
the words
event
out of my
was,
mouth. I was saying this. I was thinking the same thing, that this is bluster. I mean, I think their main goal is to keep a kind of simmering war in Syria for a long time. I think that's basically the objective, but it's also all they can hope for. On the
yeah,
other hand, as long as Syria has, its main cities under Syrian control, and they begin rebuilding, which they have, I think they can weather this.
I mean, fundamentally, it just looks like Syria and Israel are trying to keep each other on its toes, which, based on this next just little headline I'm going to read, Israel yesterday, it was Tuesday night for them, so like it was early morning Wednesday here, issued some alarms that warned there were missile strikes, like the rocket strikes that happened every once in a while between Israel and its, enemies heading for the Golan Heights. But again, it was a false alarm. And I think that's basically going to be the status quo for the foreseeable future. It's going to be a bunch of false alarms or very small strikes between basically Daraa and the Golan Heights between Israel and Syria. They're just going to spat there. But the Russians have said, basically in response to the U.S. call for, the Golan Heights and, the U.S. Congress, basically Russia said, we're not necessarily going to stand with Syria to get the Golan Heights back, but we want to enforce the 1974 agreement of, disarmament and basically kind of turn into a neutral zone while we figure everything out. So very telling, very different responses on that. So I thought that was interesting. And based on the way the influences are shifting, not just in the Middle East, but throughout the world, especially in the Middle East in this case, the Russians are probably going to get their way, and they're probably going to see some semblance to the 1974 disengagement agreement. But I thought that was interesting. And while we're on the whole region, let's get into everyone's favorite country, Israel. So, cooperation between Trump and Israel has been much less than other U.S. presidents, even less than Obama, who supposedly hated them. But again, we go over that a different day. But he didn't. Israel has taken a massive blow in Syria. In a larger context, its fight with the Iranians for regional hegemony. So, in
Yeah,
response,
yeah, it's a big blow. I mean, we also shouldn't forget that this squarely puts the pipeline deal from Qatar in Iran's pocket, and Russia and Syria to a lesser extent. That's one of the reasons this war started in the first place. It's a huge blow. I mean, this was an infrastructure project that was supposed to be able to supply Europe with gas that would curtail Russia, and it's a phenomenal blow. We're gonna This is gonna resonate for a long time. The repercussions of this,
yeah,
and
yeah. Frankly,
Israel's interests are different, however, but it is part of that side of the alliance.
yeah. Frankly, like I've been saying this for about a month or so now. Israel, even though they have less interest there, they're going to move the Yemen just to put some heat on the Iranians. And again, I do condemn, of course, what Saudi Arabia and their allies are doing in Yemen, but at the end of the day, it's still just a foreign conflict, and the U.S. has stayed out of that more so, especially compared to Syria. But another thing the Israelis have been doing is they've been ramping up operations against Hezbollah positions in Syria, not in Lebanon, surprisingly enough, and also ramping them up in Gaza ever since the recent tensions, especially after the embassy move. So I think they're more so just trying to save face, looking like, oh, hey, look how we're stamping down our enemies. We definitely didn't lose the Iranians or anything. We're just gonna put some heat on these guys, and we're gonna be big and bad, and people will respect us. So yeah, and as part of that, 26 of the deadly burning kites have been spotted on Israel's southern border, which apparently is more concerning than the ISIS and Al Qaeda positions at the Golan Heights. A bunch of burning kites, versus international terrorist groups, well tied, well funded. So, make of that what you will. And just on
Yeah,
the whole, yeah, go on.
yeah. This really hasn't turned out. I'm very sure in 2011 they were probably projecting a defeat of Assad, and this might coincide with the war in Ukraine and Crimea. I would not hazard to guess, but I would, I am going on a limb a bit that the push for Maidan in 2013 and early 2014 was not just for the Sochi Winter Olympics, but was, I think, an idea that Russia would not be able to help Syria, that inevitably Assad would lose. And many of the objective goals that are particular to what the West, what America, what NATO, and what Israel and Saudi Arabia wanted would be met. And that hasn't happened at all. So I'm just putting it in a larger context. That I think the push for Ukraine in many ways was based on an idea that Russia would be caught off guard. And
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. Bogging them down on the home front, and then Syria is easy picking, especially with 2013 Iran was nowhere near what it was today. I'm not saying there's some great power, but they were definitely much weaker than they were back then. So yeah, I can understand what you're getting at, but speaking of Iran, speaking of Israel, and speaking of U.S. interference in politics, which interference in the U.S. politics, which has been a big topic as of late, about the past year and a half, Netanyahu bragged the Likud party, which is basically his political party, that Israel is the one who convinced the U.S. to back the Iran deal, despite Trump campaigning on it. And you know what? This just reminds me of Netanyahu sitting there laughing, pretending like he won, but fundamentally, nothing has really benefited Israel by the U.S. pulling out of the Iran deal. It's more so it just raised gas prices a little for Americans, and fundamentally, nothing has really changed about it. A lot of the black pillars, as usual, went really overboard on the whole Iran deal thing, to the point where, again, nothing has fundamentally changed from pre-Iran deal era. So yeah, I thought that was a bit funny, the fact that Trump campaigned on this, but we're still going to take credit for it. And, just ignore our meddling in U.S. politics, even though we're basically bragging about it.
Yeah, it's not terribly convincing. It's not much of an achievement. It's just a lot of bluster.
And still laughably, Israel is trying to push the Iran is building nukes line. They stole apparently another collection of CDs, because apparently the Iranians haven't gotten into the digital age or anything. But yeah, apparently they stole a bunch of other CDs and other intelligence that point, oh, Iran's definitely building a nuke this time. So, and it's funny because even compared to a few months ago, nobody's listening to them. Nobody cares what they're saying.
I know. Israel is determined to supply Twitter with new memes.
Yeah, it's like possibly that makes up for everything else they've done.
Yeah, I know. Like, I mean, Iran is primarily interested in having nuclear energy so it can sell its oil, which it hasn't been able to do.
Yeah, I mean, Iran building nuclear weapons would actually be, again, they're not North Korea. They don't want to be like an isolated little hermit kingdom. They want to be a regional power, with the, ability to trade their oil. So, and they need the nuclear power to do that. So, I'm not saying like, Rouhani or any of these people are some saints, but again, at the end of the day, their goals are not the same as North Korean. People that compare the two, it just gives me a headache. But the funny thing is, like, Netanyahu still thinks 2003. He's almost as bad as the Clintons, who still thinks the 90s.
Yeah.
And like the less influence he has, the more he pushes for war. Since it used to be a yearly thing where every time the UN would say, "Oh, we got to denounce those Iranians." I mean, that's my best Netanyahu. I know it probably sucked, but who cares? That's not the point of the show. But yeah,
I mean, it was he who pushed. war in Iraq, and look at it's so ironic. He pushed for war in Iraq, and had been pushing for years. Um, and
If
I'm
we
sure
remove
he thought
Saddam,
that that would somehow
great,
weaken
great.
Iran. That would have America there to be able to watch Iran closely, and all it did was increase Iran's power. It didn't decrease it; it increased it.
I mean, believe it or not, when you destroy a country that's mostly Shia Muslim, right next to a Shia Muslim power, they tend to gain influence there. But that's
Yes.
yeah, shocker, I know. But yeah, it's just funny because Netanyahu's just the more he cries, the less he's literally the boy who cried wolf of geopolitics. That's pretty much what he. But let's move on to a completely different topic before we get into the biggest story of the day, which is just North Korea. Basically, Trump came out and said, yeah, North Korea hasn't made much progress on denuclearization yet. I think at the end of the day, this is more just pressure saying, okay, you better hurry up, because of course nobody expects it to happen overnight. But the point I'm saying this is the relationship with North Korea has kind of taken on this weird thing to the point where we can talk to them, we can negotiate with them, but by no means are we friends or allies, and that we're just going to keep on, you know, throwing these jabs at each other. And I think that's better than what we had before, and I think it'll improve over time, especially as things shift, especially in Asia. So I just figured that was worth mentioning before we got into the big story of the day. But if you have any
Mhm.
thoughts on that,
Not really. I mean, it's fairly good news. It's nothing. There's not that much developing there, in my opinion. So.
yeah, which is why it took me less than a minute just to tell you what's happening there. But yeah, like I said, things have stayed relatively stable since the summit. A lot of Trump's detractors tried to say this, like, "Oh, that summit was nothing. He just, gave up a bunch of concessions." But whatever. I mean, this is one of those things that we're going to see whether it was success or failure. It's possibly going to take, a year, if not years. But let's get into the big story of the day: the Helsinki summit. Now, for all these, the NATO summit we covered last week basically led into Trump ending it, where he was going to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who supposedly controls Trump, who supposedly controls every, anti-establishment movement in the Western world. Believe it or not, I know it's impressive. He must be a master statesman if that's the case. But a day before the summit, Trump stated that the European Union is a foe, Russia is a foe in some respects, while China is a foe economically. His statements really embody the shifting world and the growth of multipolarism that a lot of people have been talking about, especially us here on the War Report, that the fact that the global alignment is shifting, the fact that Western Europe aren't going to be, a cohesive unit just because they are Western Europe. The same with, any of these geographical regions, any of these, geographical alliances too. So that was a very positive statement, considering the fact the one who was softest on that statement was arguably Russia, because he outright called the European Union a foe, which at this point, especially in terms of trade and especially in terms of the way they treat not only the United States but other foreign powers that aren't part of the European Union, I think that's a valid statement. I think when people make the joke about it being the Fourth Reich and how Merkel has basically, achieved Hitler's dreams, I think it's true to an extent with, her basically dominion over other European states. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting comment, and I definitely agree with it. Now, what's really big about this Helsinki summit is this is the first real, at least in my assessment, diplomacy between a U.S. and a Russian leader in over 30 years. Because if we look just at the previous presidents, we have Barack Obama. He completely soured relations with the Russians and basically brought us back into a full-fledged Cold War, Cold War 2.0, as I like to call it. Because of Russia's simple involvement of ethnic conflicts in eastern Ukraine, he must have inflamed those. It wasn't the fact that these region was historically Russian, majority Russian, and that they want to secede and join the homeland. No. It's just Russian meddling. That's what happened. And basically, what I'm getting at is Crimea. And basically, he called Russia aggressive and warmongers, all while spending his entire presidency at war himself. So I guess it's the pot calling the kettle black in that case, depending on what you want to make of that. But then go back even further. We have George W. Bush, who treated pretty much Vladimir Putin as a subordinate, as he would treat, some European ally, some minor European ally, or, or how he would have treated Stephen Harper, basically. Oh, hey, you work for me. You work for me now, Vlad. That's my best George W. Please don't bully me in the comments. But yeah, he basically treated Vladimir Putin as a little lackey up until the Georgia conflict, which, mostly lies on the Georgians who really opened fire on Russian troops. But, admitted by Shashkashvili himself, I probably butchered that pronunciation, but I don't care because he doesn't deserve the dignity of a proper pronunciation of his name. But yeah, you'll never hear that. But yeah, so Bush basically treated him like a subordinate, like someone lesser than him, and then pretty much set us on the path to reignite the Cold War. Then you had, of course, Bill Clinton, who trotted around with his drunken public puppet, Boris Yeltsin. Now, keep in mind, there was actual collusion in this case. Boris Yeltsin was a literal U.S. puppet, even admitted by Time magazine in 1996. I'm sure you've all seen the cover by now. And then this really leads us to the last real relations we have between a U.S. and a Russian leader was the 1986 summit in Reykjavik, Iceland, of course, with Gorbachev. Now, of course, there was still the Soviet Union back then, but that just shows how long it's been since a U.S. president and a leader of Russia, whether it be in the form of the Soviet Union or modern Russian Federation, had actually sat down and had productive, meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, it's what an extraordinary day, and also what followed afterwards. Various governors, senators, politicians, even journalists claiming that Trump had acted with treason, and all of
the
it.
Treason summit was trending. The
treason summit. What is it like? What does meddling even imply? Did Russia try to hack into voting machines? No. Did Russia try to stuff ballot boxes? No. Basically, this is about 12, if that. I mean, this still goes back to Guccifer 2.0. About a bunch of Russians who took out Facebook ads and infiltrated someone's account. And we're supposed to believe that these Facebook memes literally swayed the election.
Yeah,
this is it. That's the extent. That's the extent of Russian meddling. I get it geopolitically. I understand why Russia has to be opposed from a Western point of view. I understand that, and it's been an ongoing project at the very least since the 1840s and 50s. So I get it, but this is honestly this is reminiscent. This kind of talk is reminiscent of 2002, 2003 in Iraq with weapons of mass destruction. The idea that you can try to make a president agree to something which is still unresolved. CNN is insisting that America was attacked. America wasn't attacked. I mean, by what scale? America
this is the next 9/11.
America has literally assassinated democratically elected presidents and put in their own puppets. This is I can't even take this thing seriously.
Now, it's actually interesting that you bring up the Great Game, like how in the 1840s that the UK decided to embark on this path of balkanizing the Russians, because during that it actually kind of mirrors what's happening now. Western Europe is opposed to Russia, barring a few exceptions. During the Great Game, and during many times, especially during the purchase of Alaska, the United States sided with the Russians over the British. So maybe we're seeing, that come back around. But yeah, I can understand, like, if you're a Western European, if you want to be a power, like if you're the, British or the French, yeah, you probably want to take down Russia. But again, if you're the United States, we have very little interest in what's happening in, that Europe or even Russia. Our primary interests are in Latin America and Asia. But another thing I want to mention is the extent of Russian meddling, which we'll get into all the other countries who meddle in our politics and meddle even more, because we did briefly address that before. But I think it's funny to the point that, the Russians did something a 15-year-old could have, where, oh, hey, they sent an email to Podesta, Clinton's campaign manager, saying, I mean, allegedly, somebody did, they say it's the Russians, oh, hey, we need your password so we can get your account so we can, stop a hacker. One of the most basic scams up there with the, Nigerian prince scam who needs a loan. So, yeah, realistically, if Russia meddled, frankly, we deserved it. And that's on the DNC for not having better cybersecurity because they tried to do similar things with RNC, but they saw right past it. And, frankly, I think it does raise the attention, whether it was the Russians, whether it was anyone, that this country does need better cybersecurity as the future. And we should really make Republican, Democrat, no matter what you are, we should make a cohesive effort as a nation to pursue cybersecurity interests because, you know what, maybe it wasn't Russia Today, but maybe something, I mean, not Russia Today is in the news network, but you all know what I mean. But, I mean, I think the Chinese are more of a concern on this front, but yeah, we need to be better protected against cyber attacks, both on military, economic, and civilian fronts. That's just my personal opinion there, but that is a bit of a side from the whole summit. But I figured that was worth saying. But go on.
Yeah, I think those are great points, especially you bringing up that for the most part of the 19th century, America sided with Russia for obvious reasons, and as you can see that kind of post World War II, even from World War One, the beginnings of this American Anglo cooperation, as the British Empire was receding and the American was ascending, that there would be this kind of partnership and the ability to govern the world, as it were. Mackinder, of course, wrote about this. If people want to research that more deeply, and why he thought islands and sparsely populated areas and having bases there was more important for world hegemony and so on. It was the political strategy of the day. So this is the mainland versus the Atlantic powers or the seagoing powers. But it's interesting you brought up that point that we might be seeing something like that. Trump also said that the EU is an enemy of America, which was a very interesting statement because he didn't expand on it, and that to me also ties in with what you're saying about a possibly very great shift. Now,
yeah, whereas he called the Russians competitors, but also immediately clarified that it's more of a compliment than an insult.
Right, I remember seeing that. Now, like one story that's been buried that occurred, I think, back in February was there was a Chinese CIA operative who was of Chinese extraction who betrayed the CIA, and 18 CIA officers were killed in the process, presumably by China. Had this been Russia, I think we might have gone to war. I mean, that would have been extraordinary, right? So you can see the part of America that's very much tied into the empire has already chose a long time ago that China and Russia will be split, and we are going to be with China, and Russia will be balkanized.
Yeah, it's actually a bit funny.
Or Russia will be compromised in one way or another. And Trump does represent a roadblock to that.
He's actually a reverse to that because I think his main strategy with Russia is to basically isolate the Chinese because, during his campaign, and I'll get into, how he's basically become a campaign Trump again, he was talking about, we got to crack on the Chinese and their currency manipulation and their, wacky trade and how they basically, play the entire world with, all the stuff they do economically. But yeah, like I said, definitely an interesting shift, and definitely we're going back to almost a pre-World War order, which I'm not complaining, but Trump,
I see that.
Like I said, he really channeled his inner campaign self the way he was in 2015, 2016, to the point where he made the quote, he's willing to take political risks to make peace. Now, in response, Vladimir Putin says, the new U.S.-Russian friendships will be showcased by helping bring peace to Syria and de-escalate the situation there. And Putin also said Trump was very attentive to his concerns about what's happening in Syria in the meeting, which shows, I mean, of course, they're going to make it sound more cordial or more hostile than what it was based on how they want to play it politically. But fundamentally, there's not much you can lie about, since I think that part was in their private meeting, in which, I theorized earlier the fact that the reason they had a private meeting is probably so Trump could say, oh, yeah, I'm not entirely in control. There's a bunch of bureaucrats who also implement a bunch of policies. So when I do something, it may not be me in particular. That's my theory, at least. I know it's a bit out there, but I think it was still a bit of an interesting take, if I do say so myself. But Yeah, that's a very positive sign that both Trump and Putin are walking away, making positive comments about each other. Even just 2 days after the summit.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll be honest. Even I was surprised the direction that Trump went. I didn't think he would be this cordial. It's monumental, really. I don't look at it negatively in the way that the left does, or the way that the GOP neocons do, or the humanitarian bombers do. And of course, they're interested in, they're entirely invested in the preservation of the empire and the way they see it, and with the long range plan. But for me, I think Trump also understands that Russia and China have to be separated, and I think he wants to appeal to Russia.
Yeah, even from
Uh,
like a non-globalist perspective, for the
yes,
U.S. to, in order to, maintain, yeah, and he basically he sees that China's the problem, especially compared to Russia. I'm not saying we can be best of friends with Russia, but Russia should become what China is. That's what he's saying. I frankly agree with him mostly. And he also made a statement, which is frequently echoed here on the War Report ever since the beginning. He said that our relationship with Russia has never been worse. And thanks to the year of U.S. foolishness and stupidity because of the rigged witch hunt. But basically, right after that, he said, about that changed 4 hours ago. This is the beginning of the press conference. And, Putin did that, smile thing that world leaders do. Even he's not immune to that, which I think is a bit funny. But yeah, so again, very cordial. And then Trump later fell back on that statement, said there were blame to be placed on both sides. There was U.S. stupidity involved, but the Russians haven't been, saints either. However, I think he's saying that more for political purposes, but I still appreciate the sentiment that he's, taking responsibility and saying, "Oh yes, the neoconservative policy since the late Cold War, post Cold War era plays a lot into the reason why the United States and Russia have such a terrible relationship."
yeah. The other thing I found interesting was, the talk of cooperation in Syria, but also cooperation in anti-terrorism and cyber attacks. I didn't expect to hear that, and I think I can understand from the left wing perspective why, and some of the war hawks like McCain, for instance, why this would be shocking, why this would be unacceptable. And a lot of it is that Russia represents a very different kind of European country, and that kind of country ascension into power, or the maintenance of its power, represents a kind of ideological existential threat to Europe, to post World War II liberal Europe, to all the notions that we have about liberalism or multiculturalism or corporations, and wage freezes from a mobile world workforce. Um, it disrupts all of that. And because a lot of these countries invest, for instance, in acquiring refugees, because it is a method that taps down on nationalist sentiment, right? We know that the more multicultural a society is, that the lower trust it is. So, and this was used as a tactic post American Civil War, where African Americans were looked at as a way to keep the South in check. And in many ways, the project of empire is such that, empire by definition is multicultural. Uh, Eventually the people who are conquered eventually are absorbed and feel a part of it. And that has been the case in a very unipolar world after the crash of the Soviet Union. And so now the fear is that nationalism will destroy certain power structures, certain institutions that have been put in place and have relied and depended on, not just for votes, but for keeping nationalism in check. Much of this generation is getting very old right now. Much of the younger generation is unhappy. Um, and feels, I think, that it doesn't have an identity, that it doesn't have an identity that's meaningful enough beyond being a consumer and a sports fan. And uh, I think it's going to continue to go that way. We're going to see in the next 20, 30 years a major shift away from the post-World War II order.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it reminds me, I can't remember who exactly said or where it's from, but basically, there comes a point in every empire where you either have to disband it or sacrifice the home culture in order to keep it going.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
I think we've reached that point. I think we reached that point a few years back to the point where especially with our immigration policies, especially with state sponsored expulsion on the Latin American countries part, the point where yes, we are sacrificing the home culture in order to uphold a pretty much we are not an American empire. We're a neoliberal empire. Even since the beginning, even since like the end of the Cold War, we never really like a few presidents' sides, maybe like an Eisenhower side, we never really stood up for American values or interests. We stood up for neoliberal and globalist values and interests. I mean, neoliberalism came a bit later, but we, stood up for, more of a globalistic order. Like I said, basically post JFK, you wonder why, he may have suffered the fate he did. I have my theories. I've made a video on that,
Mhm.
but again, you can check that another time. But yeah, fundamentally, the reaction to the summit, it got applause from the right people and boos from the right people as well. Fellow America Firsters, as I would like to call them, Pat Buchanan and Rand Paul in particular, spoke very highly of the summit, both in the concept and the fact that it was happening, and in the substance of it and what took place. So,
Yeah.
very powerful endorsements and very powerful denunciations from your Bill Kristols, John McCain's, and Hillary Clinton. So, and pick the side you want to be on for that one. But fundamentally, the only thing about the summit is no formalized agreements were made, but the dialogue still seemed very productive. And of course, their first formal meeting that isn't at the G20 or any of these other international summits, you're not going to expect a major breakthrough, any treaties to be signed. I don't know. Maybe there was something behind closed doors. They're going to come out like a month later and say, "Oh, hey, we agreed to do this." Hopefully they agreed to build that bridge between Eastern Russia and Alaska. I mean that might be fun, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. you know, if we're going to turn back the clock, we might as well you bring back that Ice Age bridge. But again, that's all side the point. But yeah, as far as we know, there were no formal treaties or peace declarations or any cooperation signed on Syria. But again, the dialogue was very productive, and that, my friends, I will not complain about.
Yeah, my only disappointment, and I mean it's happened before, and some of Trump's diehard supporters, look the other way or don't care, and that is he did have to backpedal on some of the things that he said. Um, I am a little disappointed in that he has to, but he is really alone, and we should remember that it's probably true. He did go against all of his advisors. He is headstrong about this. He is almost 180 degrees in direction from them. Um,
I'm curious. Did he take Bolton with him on this one? Since I know he took Bolton to the G7. I
mhm.
don't think he did.
I didn't read that he did. I mean, Bolton is his alter ego, so
Yeah,
that would be interesting.
yeah, because I mean, Bolton he took for the G7 for obvious reasons, since he needed like more of a attack dog, especially on the economic issues, which I will give Bolton the modicum of credit on. But I know Pompeo was there because he was the Secretary of State and kind of had to be. But yeah, so the fact that our friend John wasn't there it also points to a more positive sign, considering the fact Trump was probably going against the advice of everyone in the White House and all the bureaucratic class and all of that. So I uh, so yeah, like go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just one thing to finish off this topic before we get into some of the just absolutely stupid reactions. Do you think this will become a yearly thing like Gorbachev and Reagan? I think it probably will be like where there'll probably be like the 2019, 2020, 2021 Trump and Putin summits.
I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure. What's different about America now compared to Reagan's era, and I remember Reagan's era. I was an adult at that time. uh, is that the tension is far greater now than it was then. There was the same animosity between left wing and right wing in America, and that I think in some ways will be its undoing anyways, um, or it's kind of whatever the change will be in the next 50 years in America. It didn't exist then. Liberals hated Reagan, they despised Reagan. It was the same thing. He's a Nazi. Oh my God, how could this happen? But not at this level, none whatsoever. The media was far more cooperative, far more cordial. Reagan, as I remember, stood up for himself very well. He was, for an older gentleman, he was quite quick-witted. So it was a different time. In a way, this is more like a time of the 60s and the 80s, and that's a very dangerous cocktail. So
we have the
I would say
domestic 60s and the foreign policy 80s. Wonderful combination.
yes, yes, and that's very intense. And I really don't know what next year holds because of that. Um, the back, Trump's some of Trump's backpedaling could be interpreted as that he is malleable, that his mind can be changed. Of course, you know, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It's too hard to see at this. I would like to for these talks to continue, but of course, I really don't know if we can expect one next year.
I think there probably will be because and I think especially as this paradigm shifts, like just within the parties and political culture of the United States, I think Trump's supporter, I think as the right wing becomes more nationalistic and the neoconservatives return to their home in the Democratic Party, I think they're going to expect this Trump, and I think that the situation will probably calm down, especially with these subsequent meetings, which I think will happen. But let's get into the reaction of this, which I've been waiting all show to do, and we'll close it out with that because it's a nice, funny ending. So the usual suspects were absolutely furious. Your leftists, your neolibs, your neocons, your never Trumper, principled, true conservatives. So it really did expose some hypocrisy, actually, on both sides, even the more pro-Trump right. Because Obama met with Rouhani and Castro. Now, I don't disagree with the fact they did this, but I think he went about it all wrong. I think in terms of the Iran deal, I have no problem with it in concept, but I think it's like, oh, hey, we're going to get nothing out of this, but we're just going to give you your money back, and we're not going to try to leverage this or anything. And with Castro, it was basically just them, and they went to go watch a baseball game. That was his relation with that was his relationship and meeting with I believe it's Raul Castro now. It's his brother in power. But again, still, I don't oppose the fact that Barack Obama, I oppose the fact that they would conduct themselves. And, I also don't oppose the fact that Trump went with Kim and himself very well in these meetings. So, principled stance like owning dictators, like they're just going to automatically meet with them. I think, again, it may be a naive, ideal princess sit here and pretend like Obama on deals, Trump is, placating the next Hitler himself. Fair enough, but if you're going to pretend like Obama should know Cubans, the Iranians, but then praise these summits, again, like I said, it's fair enough to criticize it. Like nobody should have met with anyone, or they should have done different things during the meetings, completely different. Yeah, fine. It's funny because you have a lot of people calling Trump a traitor and a puppet of Vladimir Putin and basically controlled by a foreign power. Now we got to keep in mind, a lot of these politicians, journalists, bureaucrats, in any government positions, many of them work on behalf of foreign countries themselves. Mainly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, those other Gulf states, Mexico, China, the EU, and yeah, they like to come out. When they have, it's like Hillary Clinton the other day saying, "What team does Trump play for?" While she's, taking money from Saudi Arabia and turn emails, the fact that, oh yeah, I want to destroy. So yeah, hypocrisy on that front, but it's funny. And I think the strategy we calling these people out, we can't necessarily disprove Russian collusion. They're not going to listen to that. But the way we're going to win over the layman is saying may meddle, but look at who meddles a lot more in this country. Look at it kind of like what Tucker Carlson said the other day. I believe it was on Monday. Russia should be like concerned number 115 on this list.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the reactions were just mind-bending. Politico. There was another one by Cohen suggesting that, where is the military? And we have to impeach him right now. It was literally the sky is falling. It was implicitly we have to go to war over this. It is a huge blow. I would say to the neoliberal order, to the Western order, it's an immense blow to them. So I mean, I don't empathize with them. I don't care that they don't like it, but it does. I do understand their point of view. From their point of view, he conceded too much.
Well, it's kind of like
the reactions were just complete lunacy. And I thought P.T. Carlo had a great tweet. He said that they're scaling back on the intensity of these tweets because they're realizing they are ridiculous. However, that does bring up the fact that war might be necessary. Because if things, and this is why I'm hesitant to say, will there be another meeting next year, is everything is at stake. If half of what Trump said is true and what he agreed with Putin, then this is something that's going to have a tremendous reaction. I don't, folks, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm being very serious about that. I worry. So, because everything is at stake.
Yes, especially, I may take a more optimistic look, but just not even on the foreign policy side, but just on the domestic policy side with how much comes out against these people. I think there's going to be a revolt against them. They're going to, I think by the, middle of Trump's second term, which you probably will get, these people will probably be completely rooted, completely just kicked out. I'm being a bit dramatic, a bit optimistic here, but yeah, I do think that these people are losing influence and losing fast. They're going to try to pull one final thing. It may work, it may not work, but just one of the dumbest reactions. Somebody tweeted this. It was some nobody, not even a blue check mark, basically saying that they're calling for, escalation with Russia, if not outright war. Now, some of them suggested moving naval positions in Europe to the Black Sea, like they're not already there, and placing even more tank divisions in, the Baltics and even in Ukraine. Not only is this stupid geopolitically and a flare-up, but it is a prime area for Russia's defensive weapons of hot war were to ever unlikely and unfortunately break out. Russia's military is mainly designed to fend off an invasion from its western front.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely.
So, I mean, there were vigils yesterday, people calling, oh, we need to stand up to Russia. Again, if we're taking on, assuming that the nukes don't get used, which, I mean, that's unlikely if the U.S. and Russia got a conflict, not even, purposely, but, just one thing leads to another. And we try to take on Russia from the Western Front, from Europe. This has been proven time and time again to fail, especially nowadays with the investments the Russians putting in their military in terms of defensive technologies like the S-400 and S-500 air defense systems. With some of their tanks are, of course, mainly defensive, made for the plains of Eastern Europe. Yeah, this is not going to end well for us. So, like I said, hopefully, and what I think is going to happen is these people are going to have their dying grasp. They're going to push for one more war, whether it be in Syria or Iran or, probably Yemen at this point, because, that's a low-risk war that could also make them just feel on top and, preserve their order for a while because, we have to, stick out this war. We can't pull another Obama and pull out of Yemen early. So, yeah, that's probably what I see happening. Like I said, I think geopolitically everyone's going to focus on Yemen, except probably the Russians because they don't have too much interest there. But, yeah, keep your eye there. And I'm making the prediction that as I just did, Yemen will be the neoliberal new conservative last stand before they go quietly into the night.
Wow. Well, that's hopeful. Um, and it could very well be the case. I can't see that far right now. Uh, but that sounds plausible to me that that might be it. I worry more about, something happening domestically, to try to undermine uh, Trump, to try to undermine the direction that he's taking the country. So, I would look to all kinds of crazy things happening prior to the midterms and whatever happens thereafter. I think they're really going to try everything they've got to impeach him,
I mean,
because
just one
because
thing
the
about
stakes
Trump.
really are that high. You have a lot of people who are, we shouldn't forget that, the other country that's was probably not that happy with the way the meeting went in Helsinki is China.
Oh yeah,
And
especially with the pressure we've been putting on them. This is probably part of the grand strategy. In our competition with China to the point where we want Russia on our side. But yeah, and about the impeachment of Trump, there's one thing that could domestically cause a bunch of pissed off hard right wingers armed to the teeth to actually go out and use those arms. It is actually them impeaching Trump on a witch hunt.
yeah, yeah.
So that's one time the Second Amendment may actually save this country. Of course, I try to take the optimistic outlook, but yeah, I mean, I think they're not even dumb enough to try to impeach Trump. I think, of course, they'll keep him on his toes. But yeah, again, I see the neoliberal order like they're going to try their damnedest to carry out one final war, but I think that'll eventually destroy them as well as the country that is so unfortunate to be their target. But that is my
Mhm.
take for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the War Report. This has been
Thanks,
Constantine.
guys.
If there's anything you would like to plug before I go off air,
Uh, no, just in about 2 weeks, I'll be doing a stream with a friend of mine, and it will be on Macedonia and on Macedonian identity and so on,
and
and
and uh,
and other.
and on
Uh,
Monday, we'll be doing another stream with somebody else, basically talking about dual citizenship and how that plays into identity and all of that. So you can catch us there. You can, of course, catch him when he does that. I'll be sure to shill it here. I'll be sure to shill it on Twitter. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and goodbye.
Thank you.